Thank you so much, Mike. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much to the Silicon Valley Leadership Group for this opportunity. It's really great. So what I would like to do is to give you a sense of what we're going to experience together over the next 75 minutes and introduce this amazing panel. And then I'm going to define the difference between a linear economy and a circular economy with the help of 4 of you. Okay, so I warned you. All right. So as Mike said, I'm Pamela Gordon. I'm a senior consultant at an international environment, health and safety and sustainability consultancy called Antea Group. And I am, as promised, is in the title of this program. This is about designing a more sustainable future. So we'll give you vision. We'll, through some 3 amazing case studies, give you some progress update of what's happening. And at the very end, just before our general questions, we'll give you a roadmap, all for eco-design and the circular economy. So I'll introduce us, I think, in the order that we'll be speaking. So Tom Calderwood is with Oracle. And Tom and I first met when he worked for Sun Microsystems before the Oracle acquisition. And he's been a driver in terms of responsible supply chain manufacturing and now in terms of remanufacturing. And Tom is based here in Silicon Valley, and he's director of the reverse supply chain. So we're glad to have you. And next speaking will be Bruce Clafter, and we've heard that he's had a role in SVL, Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Bruce and I first met when he was working for Applied Materials. Bruce is an environmental attorney by training, not currently in everyday work. And then after that, he had a fabulous expert in residency position at the Presidio Graduate School. And I'd like to say a shout out to Dr. Dariush Rafinajad, who is the provost of Presidio Graduate School. So Bruce was in that role, and then he started at Flextronics, now called Flex. And at Flex, he's the vice president of corporate social, environmental, and corporate social and environmental responsibility. And he's also not only a volunteer for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, but also for Actera and for the Responsible Business Alliance and many other groups, so very, very active in the field. And next we'll have Lou Ramondetta speaking. And Lou, you've also done some volunteering for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Yeah. Yes.
A number of other committees.
Right. And I first met Lou when he was working at Sanmina here in Silicon Valley. And so he has all of that experience of supply chain, manufacturing, the marketing side as well. And now he's president of a company in Fremont called Surplus Service. And what this firm does is they repair, refurbish, and resell products to divert them from landfill or worse fates. So glad that you're on the panel. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Judy Glazer with HP Inc. And she's the global head of sustainability and product compliance. And Judy and I first met at HP, 12, 10, a long time, many years ago. I've often, and you'll see why when you see her case study and a video that's terrific, but Judy continues to impress me with the forward thinking of her and her team in terms of product stewardship and looking ahead and driving forward with creative ideas towards sustainability. So her case study also will be a treat. All right, so I'd like to ask for 4 volunteers, please. Yes, come. And yes, you. 2 more. Yes, please. And please. Perfect. All right, come on up. So Julie will be here. Okay. Okay, so you three come in the middle. Here we go. Great. So I'm Pam, you are Michelle, Leslie,
Julie.
Steve and Julie. Okay, thanks guys, I appreciate it. So we are the linear economy. And I am going to, this is going to be representing either a laptop or some kind of a desktop or a notebook or, yes, an iThingy, right, exactly, that's right. So this is the linear economy. This is what you experience every day. We've all been experiencing for decades, for centuries. Okay, so I'm the designer of this e-thing, and Michelle is the manufacturer, and Leslie is the transportation. Steve is the user of it, and Julie is representing the post-use. Okay, so I'm designing this thing. I really want to make it fast. I want to make a lot of them. I want to make them cheap. And I'm making some specialized plugs that no one else uses, and some interfaces that are unique. And I think it's really great. Okay, please manufacture it, Michelle. Okay, good. Now please distribute it, Leslie. Okay, good. And now we've got the user. All right, he's using it, Very good, very good. Are you done now? Okay, done. Bye-bye. Where is it? I don't care. Do you care where it is? Does anybody care where it is? No? Okay, all right. So that was the linear economy. So now we're going to circle up. So we're literally going to make a circle. Good. All right, it's a semicircle. You can live with that, right? All right. So we are the circular economy. I'm the designer. We each have the same roles. Now, I'm going to design this so that it has a long life. I'm actually not going to sell it to Steve. I'm going to lease it to him. And I'm going to see that nothing in this product is going to leak outside of our economy. It's going to be economically valuable forever. It's never going to be waste, and I'm not going to deplete the resource, the finite resources that are ours to borrow in the earth, okay? So I'm designing this thing with a standard interface. Any standard plug can work with this. It's extremely sturdy, and there's hardly any moving parts, which are less reliable. This has a module inside that I can use in this generation, next generation, and the third generation, and the refurbishment and repair are really easy. Plus the case is scratch-proof, and I think it's going to have a very long life. Okay, so please manufacture this. Okay, please distribute. Okay, and Steve, I've leased this to you. Okay, good. So now Julie, this is post-use. You are reverse logistics. And I'd like it back, please. Thank you. Now we can go many, many, many more times. I might have to refurbish it. I might have to sell it or lease it to a new person or sell it to a secondary market. But every design element has circularity in mind. Thank you very much. Nice job. Okay, so that's the vision. That's the circular economy vision with eco-design up front. That was the role I played of really thinking differently. Now let's go into the progress aspect of this talk. And Tom, I would like to ask you to start. It's a great story.
So, that's my,
Oh,
no. Hear me? Okay. I've been at Oracle since they acquired Sun Microsystems in 2010, and to me this is a journey. I've worked at many other high-tech companies. Products evolve, companies evolved. Oracle was a software company when they acquired Sun Microsystems, that was a hardware company. They had some software as well, but I think there was a journey for the business as far as how Oracle integrated us, and now they're into the cloud business. So we still do hardware, we still do software, but we also do cloud services. But you look at the journey the industry's been on. If you look at 2003, the European Union or the European states at the time passed legislation around RoHS, restrictions on hazardous substances, and also on waste electrical equipment. You had to offer take-back programs, recycling, and so on. Sun and other companies had to offer those programs. That became part of the law. The reason why I'm bringing that up is when you're talking about circular economy, there's no laws around circular economy yet in Europe, but there will be soon. The EU is working on that legislation now. So it's always good to keep that in mind. I think one of the earlier panels were talking about how policy is done much differently in Europe than it is in the US. Europe leads a lot of this type of activity, so it's good to look at what they're doing for what's coming our way. But the key thing here is around producer responsibility. We've expanded the scope of how we manage our take-back programs at Oracle. It's not just taking back and recycling. More and more the focus is how do you make the whole program financially sustainable. At Sun Microsystems, it was more about the environmental aspect. Once we became part of Oracle, you had to show the financial side of it as well. But we've really expanded it to say it's a big help to the customers. They don't want to focus on how do you end of life in recycled product. So we broadened our focus to how do we provide more services to the customer to get product back? How do we reuse more of the product? When we get it back, how do we recover more value? If you can't get reuse out of it, then you finally recycle. So it's been a journey, and I think that's the key message. This is how we look at circular economy. There's lots of different slides that describe circular economy. Pam's little thing up there, but bottom left-hand side you see my group is reverse supply chain operations. If you start at the bottom lower left, raw materials go to component suppliers that go into internal and external manufacturing sites. They ship spare parts to service. They ship whole products to revenue customers or into Oracle's cloud data centers. The green lines represent the reverse flow, and that's the part that I manage within Oracle. Take-back programs get the products out of the data centers. We have recycling locations in each region. They look for reuse, they harvest parts, they'll debrand and sell components. Whatever can be reused gets recycled. And we track very closely the data security compliance, the recycling and environmental compliance, as well as the financial benefits of that. For managing and trying to make a reverse, circular economy work is the more channels you have to recover value, the more resilient your supply chain will be or your whole financial model. If you just have one way to recover value, you're exposed. So you talked about resilient supply chain, resilient circular model economies. The more ways that you can recover value across a broader set of products through a broader set of partners or suppliers, then the better off you're going to be. The enabler of the circular economy for our business, our industry, and our industry is different than every other company, but there's similarities, right? Its benefit we have is that we have some customers that are in business, they want to take the latest technology, they run it for 3 to 5 years, they retire and move on to the next generation. We have other customers that want to run for 6 years, 10 years, 15 years. So the companies that refresh every 4 years, we're using those parts to help support the customers that have a longer life cycle need. So because of that staggered relationship, it's good for us, it's good for the environment, it's good for our customers. If they want to run their products for 15 years, we have a model in place that supports them. Why have we put the focus to make our take-back programs and our cost recovery better each year? It really comes down to, it's not so much we're compliant with the government regulations and we're doing it for financial reasons, but I think the it's mostly about the customers. The customers value the program. They can continue to come back. There's a lot of cases, well, they could buy the same product or they could sell their leftover product to maybe your broker for more than we would be willing to pay for it, but we provide other services that are maybe less tangible, but still valued by the customer. So it's a lot about how do you expand this into, it's not just buying and selling, it's providing other services. The future. I won't cover all the points, but the education is a key thing. I think when I was first in the position, I thought I just have to worry about recycling stuff. And it wasn't as important to worry about if I recycle, I'm doing the right thing. Well, guess what? Electronic companies, 99% of what gets designed and manufactured is recyclable, but the reality is maybe 20% actually ends up getting recycled. The majority of product ends up going into landfills, not through our program, but because we sell our hardware to customers, we can't control what they do with it, and that's why we try to make our programs more appealing to them. But the point is that there's a difference between reuse and recycle. It's much more beneficial to the environment if you are reusing. Recycle is more of a last resort. When you're managing your own programs, think more broadly. Think about developing more channels for recovered value. Make sure you're looking at all the regions around the world. Don't focus on US or Europe. And then also look at I think some of the big lessons are around customers, internal groups. They all want the Amazon experience. They want to turn things more quickly. They want things immediately. If you look at a supply chain, it's not just how environmentally compliant my recycling is, but every transportation loop has a carbon footprint impact. So as we look at this, we're now evaluating when our 7 largest cloud data centers, they're located in the 3 different regions. 4 out of the 7 data centers we've set up our recycling processors within 25 miles of our cloud data centers. So one important phrase is the cleanest mile or the greenest mile is the mile not driven. So if you don't have to transport product this far back to do the end-of-life processing, much better for your carbon footprint. The last point there, move faster. Move faster. So I know some people are working with their suppliers to establish goals. That's what we're trying to do as well. Those will eventually end up in a CSR report, but for right now we're trying to maybe focus on improving and reducing rather than other areas. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, Bruce Clafter.
Thank you, everybody, for sticking around and coming to the session. I'm sure we can have a very productive continuation of the discussion out over some wine and beer later. What I want to do before I make a couple of remarks about some of the things that Flex is doing in this space is make a few observations about the imperative for it, the urgency for it. We happen to have a panel here where we're talking primarily about ICT equipment, electronics. There are naturally discussions to be had about other parts of the economy, but I want to make the point right at the outset that I think it's absolutely imperative that we work much harder in a much more concerted fashion on this in the ICT industry because the amount of e-waste is growing so dramatically. I love this particular infographic that's here, taken from what's called the Global E-Waste Monitor, that suggests that in the last full year for which they had data, which was 2016, there was enough e-waste discarded to be the equivalent of 4,500 Eiffel Towers. That may or may not be easier for you to think about as opposed to pounds or tons and so on, but suffice to say that the numbers are huge and it is only going to grow. Take a look at the chart on the right side. What that's showing is not only is the trend upwards in terms of e-waste generated each year, but also the amount per capita, which is shown in the lower part, in the blue bars. So We are making and using more and more electronic devices every year, but unfortunately we are discarding them. And a lot of it goes to the point that Pam made so interestingly in her little demonstration about design being one of the critical components in this holistic picture, because if devices are not designed for the circular economy to be disassembled, to be reused, to be refurbished, to be remanufactured, then they are naturally going to be discarded. When you combine that with the velocity, with the numbers, you have a very serious situation. Just one number that I have in mind is last year there were about 500 million cell phones manufactured and sold around the world. And that's probably one of the examples we can all understand. Just about all of us probably carry one of them, and we know that they're designed almost for obsolescence effectively. So every year to year and a half, our cell phone providers come out with new, sexier models, entice us to buy that one and discard the old one. And in some cases, they've manufactured so you can't even change out the battery yourself. It's very, very difficult. So this is critical. The other thing that I'd like you to keep in mind, this is something that Flex is working on, is the Internet of Things. You've heard that term. Essentially any IoT device is connectable to the internet, and we're going to see many more of these in the future. Our estimation, based on the research we've done, is that very shortly there will be 50 billion connected devices on the planet. So that means not only our phones, our computers, our tablets, and so on, but your lights, your smoke alarm in your home, your refrigerator, your oven. They're all going to have connectivity, for better or worse. I mean, I know it's hard for us to conceive of the utility of connecting some of those devices, but that seems to be where the marketplace is going. So that means there will be electronic devices embedded in each and every one of those appliances, and therefore that will be another stream of material that could potentially be discarded at some point along the way. So the imperative is just enormous, I think. Now let me talk a little bit about what I'll refer to as the ecosystem for circularity. On the left side there where I've got the pyramid, my point there is a simple one, is that there are various steps along the way that are all essential to facilitating a circular economy, of course beginning with design, as Pam mentioned, but then there's also sort of a new 3 R's that I've seen coined in various places. So that would be returning the devices, so take back, somehow acquiring them or reacquiring them from the consumers as part of it, repairing them, and then recovering the materials that we want to reuse and discarding as little as possible. And then there are several other steps along the way. What I want to suggest to everyone in the room is that we will fail in creating a circular economy unless we pay attention to all of those steps and unless we enable a lot of players to play roles in that economy. I can tell you from the standpoint of an enterprise, very few companies, probably none, are really equipped to do this by themselves. And we have examples of companies, for instance, who have tried to create take-back schemes, and they've been more or less successful because they simply lack the reach necessary to make that happen. We have to have a lot of places throughout society where we can bring materials back. We have to have consumers, every single one of you and everybody else who owns the devices, incentivized to bring them back in. And then we have to have other players, companies like Luz and others, and companies like Flex, who can provide the services necessary to make all of these steps happen. So let me just now tell you a little bit about Flex so you can understand where we are in this particular ecosystem. We're essentially a very large manufacturing services company, and among the services we provide are refurbishment and remanufacturing repair. So we do work in that 3R space. We have about 100 factories around the world, and at 30 of those locations we offer those particular services. just to give you an idea of the volume of transactions, my colleagues tell me that in the last 12 months they repaired roughly 4.5 million devices of one kind or another. Now that sounds like a large number, but again, relative to the millions and millions of devices out there, still relatively modest. And I would also add that most of those transactions were for particular types of devices. They tend to be ones that are still under warranty, so you have an incentive as a consumer to bring it back into your retailer and for it to ultimately go to a location like the ones that Flex maintains so they can be repaired. They also tend to be higher value types of devices. We do a lot of repair work on commercial and industrial equipment. We do a lot of repair work on things like gaming devices, gaming stations, which also have fairly high value and so on. There's not a lot of it being done on household appliances, phones and so on, although hopefully that's going to grow. One of the other things we also do is we have a couple of locations worldwide which are as close to circularity as we can possibly get. One is in Brazil, the second is in Mexico, where the repair and ultimately reuse of those devices is facilitated by the business model. So Pam mentioned in her little example that potentially that tablet was then going to be leased to Steve instead of sold to Steve. Well, at our location in Mexico, we manufacture copiers for a large customer. All of those copiers are leased to their customers. So at the end of the lease period, they come back into this same facility and they are repaired just like bringing your automobile into a repair shop. We bang out the dents, we repaint the chassis, we strip out all the parts that need to be replaced, and then on site, we have a recycling facility where we shred all the material that we can and then we reuse it. So plastic gets turned back into plastic cullet and it gets re-injected into molding machines and we make new parts out of it. So that's what I wanted to offer today. Again, if you take away two things, I'll have been successful. Number one, we need to get working on this and very urgently because the amount of waste is growing. It seems to be endless. And then number two, all of the companies represented on this panel and perhaps others of you in the room and certainly outside have to play our part in this ecosystem. Otherwise, we'll never reach the scale that's necessary for us to have a truly circular economy. It is economy with a capital E for sure. So thank you very much.
Lou.
So, I don't know about the folks in the room, but I hate waste. I grew up in a family where if my dad saw that I was not in a bedroom and the light was on, all hell broke loose. So that was totally unacceptable. My mom used to go to tag sales and get all sorts of stuff. So we had like 7 of everything because someday you never know, the kids might need an extra toaster or something. And if it worked, you might as well, keep it because why go out and buy something new? So that's probably haphazardly how I ended up into this business. My background is I worked for GE on the medical side of the business. I also worked for GE on the plastic side of the business, as well as electronics. Also worked with Philips Medical Systems and as well with Sanmina that does contract manufacturing similar to what Flextronics does. So this is a huge industry or a huge issue right now. From the perspective of our company is very conscientious and very passionate about recycling and reuse. About 85% of what comes into our facility gets repaired, refurbished, and reused. We were recognized for being California's Business of the Year. We were Actera's most sustainable business. We're certified B Corporation. We're also very passionate about making sure we were last year we were nominated by the SBA for being their Business of the Year. So that's stuff that's really important for us. Recently, we basically became a zero carbon footprint. So we changed out our roof, went to a reflective roof. We went to HVAC heat exchange units, so we weren't using any power. We put up solar on our building. We're in the process now of getting battery-operated cars. We changed all of our lights over to LED lights, and we're not a big company, we're a small company, but from a sustainability perspective, that's very important for us, and that's something that we focused on. And quite frankly, it was a profitable thing for us to do in the long run. So a little bit about the industry. So we're on the back end of the industry. We are not the most sexy part of the industry. We're not the people who do all the coding. We're not the people who do the glamorous manufacturing. We're not the people who do the servicing. We're the people who basically get all the junk, all the garbage, all the stuff that you don't want anymore. It comes to us, and then we're responsible from a regulatory perspective and a disposition perspective to make sure that it gets properly disposed. And that's all great, that's all fine and dandy, but the problem right now in the industry is that if you go back to the 1980s, the 1990s, China was ecstatic to be able to get all of the waste that the US produced. So whether it was paper, cardboard, plastic, e-waste, anything, they were happy to get it because their economy was growing like crazy. And we were happy to ship it to them because it was great for exports and it was easy to do and it was much less expensive for us to ship it overseas. The problem is, of late, China has decided that, hey, we don't want your stuff anymore. We don't want all that junk anymore. So they've essentially closed up all of their ports and said, we're no longer going to take all your paper, we're not going to take all your metal, we're not going to take your cardboard, we're not going to take your e-waste, we're not going to take any of that stuff. So what's happened in the industry is you've seen a tremendous drop in commodity prices. What used to be, for example, I'll give you an example. We have a bunch of metal recycling bins in the back of our building. We used to get anywhere from a few hundred to a few $1,000s per container when we turn that in. Now, we're arguing with the recyclers about whether we have to pay them for that equipment. So we've gone from making money, not a lot of money, but making some money off of it, to now having to ultimately probably end up paying. And what's happening in the industry, if you look at some of those comments up there, is you're seeing a lot of companies starting to raise prices to consumers because it's much more costly for them to deal with stuff. And you're seeing a lot of companies starting to go out of business. Right here in the Bay Area, a company based in Santa Clara, ECS, one of the biggest recyclers in the Bay Area, is having significant financial issues and recently filed for Chapter 11. So it's a huge issue right now in the Bay Area and across the country where processors are starting to have additional fees and people are starting to spend more money. And the problem is nobody knows where this stuff is going to go now, because over the last 20 years, all this stuff used to go overseas, and we decided as Americans we didn't want to be able to process this stuff anymore in the States. We basically wanted to be able to not have processing facilities or refining facilities here. Well, guess what? Now China doesn't want that stuff, so we have to figure out what we're going to do with all of it. And that's a big challenge right now in the industry. So I wanted to talk a little bit about recycling and what it really means, because we've all grown up under the impression that the best thing to do is to recycle, and it's a wonderful thing and it's important. But sometimes we forget what really matters in recycling. And recycling is about not just being able to reuse something, but it's about the carbon that's generated, and it's about the energy used to remanufacture the item. So if you look up here, you've got 3 different items. They're all coffee. One's a metal can, one's a plastic, I believe, container. Yeah, one's a plastic container, and the other one's a pouch that is not recyclable. So most people, I don't know about the folks in this room, but a lot of people that I talk with would say, my God, we cannot have this plastic pouch because that's not recyclable. That's going to be the worst thing we can possibly buy our coffee in. But when you actually look at the numbers and you look at the amount of energy that's used to manufacture a metal can, or the amount of energy that's used to manufacture a plastic can, the amount of energy generated, the amount of greenhouse gases with all of that, what you find out is that it's actually much less or much more economically efficient to do the pouch rather than the metal can and or the plastic can. So we encourage folks to really start thinking about recycling in a different way. And it's not really just about recycling, it's about reuse. And what you're hearing here from some incredible companies, HP, Oracle, and Flex, is that they have programs in place that are really geared around not only recycling, but reuse, which is really what we haven't historically promoted, because recyclers today, when you buy something, a percentage of what you buy goes to that product. And then when you recycle it, the recycler gets back that money. But unfortunately, if something gets reused, nobody gets anything unless you're in that business and you're trying to sell stuff. So we really don't encourage reuse. We make it somewhat challenging for a lot of manufacturers to do it, but it's something that we should really think more about doing. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, from a reuse perspective, is the repair aspects of it. So there's a couple of bills right now. One bill is AB 2110. The other bill is AB 3178. They're geared around reuse, repair, and also being able to disposition these assets, given the fact that a lot of landfills are making it more challenging to dispose of stuff. If you look at these numbers, and this is kind of surprising, you think, okay, when I get rid of my iPhone, and it's hard for me to look at this, because at the same time, we love it when Apple comes up with a new, what are they at, 11 now? iPhone 11. So when Apple comes out with a new iPhone 11, that's great for us, because and I'll pick on millennials, but all the millennials say, oh my God, I can't have my iPhone 10 or 9 or 8, I gotta get rid of it, because I need the latest, greatest technology. So what do? They give it to us, and then we'll repair, refurbish, we'll wipe the drives, we'll remarket it to the secondary market. But unfortunately, a lot of those products have significant amounts of years of use left, whether it's an iPhone, whether it's a computer, whether it's a medical piece of equipment. We do a lot of medical equipment. If you look at this, actually about over 50% of the repairs for a lot of this equipment are simple repairs. It's stuff like replacing out screens, which get cracked, or stuff like replacing out batteries that need to be replaced. So the easier that manufacturers can make it to replace out screens and and replace batteries, the easier it's going to be for us to be able to reuse a lot of things. If you look at the total of this, you add in the cosmetic issues associated with a lot of this stuff, you're looking at like 65% of repairs are typically relatively minor repairs that happen relatively easily and aren't really expensive to do. We just need to make it easier for repair companies like us. We need OEMs, manufacturers, to make it easier for repair companies like us to be able to do that. Then lastly, I'll just talk really quickly about us and what we do. So our company does something called RTV, which is return to vendor. So we get stuff from a lot of retailers, stuff that if you go in and you buy a computer, you don't like the computer, you return it back to your fries. They're typically not going to take that and turn around and resell it, and they're usually not going to send it back to a vendor because it's very expensive for them to do that. So third-party logistics companies, which is what we do, a lot of that stuff will come back to us. We also deal with a lot of companies on the e-waste side, so whether it's stuff that they're manufacturing and or stuff that's coming out of their offices, we'll take that and we'll repair, refurbish, and reuse that. And then lastly, the thing that we concentrate on, a big part of our business, we have a lot of companies who do lab equipment, a lot of companies who do medical equipment, and that's actually a wonderful market, one that I love doing, because if you look at a typical, I'll give an example of an MR system. I used to be with GE. Typical MR system, new one is going to cost you about $2.5 million. The lifespan of an MR system is easily 15 years. But when you get into a lot of these big luminary hospitals, they turn this equipment on a fairly regular basis, so it might last 5-7 years. During that process, all of this equipment has what they call PMs, which is preventive maintenance. So they'll repair it on a regular basis. So by the time it's replaced, it's usually in very good condition. But it's going to be sold by us at a fraction of that price. And a lot of times it's going to be sold to somewhere in the rural US, or it's going to go down to South America, or it's going to go to a place where they're ecstatic to have a new ultrasound machine or a new MR system. So that's a part of the business we really like to do. So that's it.
Thank you, Lou.
So by now you've seen that this is a huge challenge for us, and you're wondering, what can I do to make my business more circular? And the challenge that I think all of us face is, if it were easy, you'd have done it already. And finding a way to engage your customers, make the business more circular, and do it in a way that makes economic sense is where the challenge is. And in our experience, the implication of that is really thinking around that whole value chain. Think back to that circle in a circular economy, and understanding what drives the economics and the motivations of everyone in that circle. And it's been our experience, it's my position, that if you do that, you can find value you didn't know was there. And you can find ways to make your business or your community more circular that will work for you and be sustainable in a financial as well as an environmental sense. So I want to share some examples from our experience. What I really hope you'll do is listen for how could you take some of those concepts into other areas, whether in electronics or outside of it, because if you do that, will accelerate the circular economy. So I want to start by talking about an example that speaks to the challenge of waste. In this case, it's somebody else's waste that we're bringing into North America and upcycling. These are water bottles, and I want to show you what we've done with them. And if all works smoothly here, a video should start. Looks like it's working, but without sound.
Pendant après tout janvier, nous venons vivre en battante. Après, nous essayons à prendre une balle pour arriver plus devant. Après ça, nous venons dans la plastique là, et puis nous venons continuer, moi, à l'école, et puis nous continuons avec. Ils sont capables de vivre, c'est ça que fait, moi, intéressé.
So what I think is exciting about this is that in one of the poorest countries in the world, we're taking something that's a problem, water bottles, beverage bottles, we're turning it into a resource that we use to make new print cartridges, one of our most highly engineered and profitable products. And we're doing it in a way that is pretty much a break-even proposition for us. We're already using water bottles. We use lots of them, 1 million water bottles a day to make print cartridges. We're now adding this source, and we're creating new economic opportunity and education for kids. And we're doing that working with a plastics compounder in North America. I wouldn't say it's easy. We've done a lot of engineering to get there. It's taken a lot of collaboration from the company that collects the scrap, the plastics compounder, our molders, our engineers, to make that work. But it can be done, and it can really, whoops, I went backwards. It can be done at scale. And we see that as one part of an ecosystem for driving a circular business model for printing, starting with the cartridges in the middle, moving to paper, where we've made a commitment to zero deforestation, to the recycling process, and then to the printer, where we are now taking printers returned to retailers in the course of buying new ones and turning that printer plastic into plastic for new printers. So we feel we've kind of closed the loop, and we found a way to make each of those steps pay for us. Sorry. So let me talk a little bit about how we've made the printers work, because I think it really illustrates this point about making the entire value chain work for you. So a focus on design for environment is an enabler, and that's something we've been doing for many years and have had to double down on as we've focused on running a more end-to-end business. To use printer plastic to make new printers, we've really needed to look at the whole value chain and to innovate collaboratively with the reseller who sells the product eventually, or the retailer, our design team, our manufacturer, the molders that support that manufacturer, and our take-back solutions. what we've been able to do is to increase value at every node. And everybody gets something. So the retailer likes it because a trade-in program, when someone replaces their printer, creates store traffic, which is a challenge for retailers today. Our sales team likes it because they found that that trade-in program is pretty effective at getting new customers that are profitable customers for us who buy a printer that's much more energy efficient and smaller. So they get some benefits there. We like it because we're able to work with the retailer and sort out that material and take those printers to our recycling center where we can separate out a plastic stream we know a lot about that has good characteristics to be plastic for the next printer. And we're then able to work with a plastics compounder to turn that into a flow of plastic that's ready to be injection molded, which can then be shipped out to be injection molded near the manufacturing location for the printer. So we're diverting a lot of waste, and we're doing it in a way that closes our own loop and really drives a focus on design for environment because we can see the benefit of our actions in a much more direct way. We've also seen that innovating on the business model is crucial. So I mentioned the trade-in program for the printers. That was a different way to engage with the retailer. Another way we've looked at that is in how we sell cartridges and moving to the kind of services model that we illustrated in our demonstration at the beginning. So, we listen to our customers, and we know that when most people think about buying a new printing supply, they think about a couple of things, or they have historically. The first one is when I really need it is when I run out. I see a few nods. And then the second one is then when I go to get it, it costs too much. So we've tried to address both of those things in a new way. So we have an Internet of Things solution. This printer is on the internet. We offer the cartridge as a service. You pay a flat monthly fee, a low one. Cartridges show up before you need them because we're paying attention to how the level of your ink. It turns out that this is a really a solution that delights customers, and we retain those customers. It also turns out to be that the sustainability benefits and the cost model that makes it work are kind of symbiotic. So we offer this to customers at a much lower price than buying cartridges at retail. The reasons we can do that are we don't have to keep reacquiring this customer, we don't have to have retail packaging, we don't have the same security issues that retailers have with small expensive things. It's a lower price. A different way of looking at those same facts is to look at all the materials you took out. And what we find, when you eliminate the retail packaging, you provide the customer a bigger cartridge, which helps us with our logistics, but would never work at retail because it would cost even more. We get an average 57% reduction in the materials consumption per printed page for the exact same reasons that we drive the cost down. So the cost isn't lower just because that was the price point that we could acquire our customers at. It's lower because we actually changed things that took cost and waste out of the system. And so to me, that's really been inspiring for us in thinking about where else can we take that idea? How can we change our business in ways that are better for our customer and drive our business and drive our sustainability performance in the right direction? So, hope I've given you some thoughts to stimulate discussion, and before you join us in the lobby for a networking discussion, we're going to have a panel discussion.
Thank you, Judy. As you saw in this panel, the circular economy is being deployed by leaders, by a small percentage of the overall electronics and I'm sure the entire world's industries. By 2021, our team forecasts that we'll have defined business models and infrastructure for the circular economy to enable a lot more success. And as Judy pointed out, some business savvy makes sense, as in CENTS, business models for the circular economy as well. Then by 2026, we forecast that there will be harmonized requirements. Now, as is typical, Europe goes first, and then the rest of the world does something similar to Europe, but hopefully in the end we're all harmonizing with something that makes it a lot easier to do business and indeed to actualize the circular economy. And then by 2036, what INEMI is forecasting is ubiquitous adoption of the circular economy, eschewing the linear model. Well, maybe that'll happen sooner. That would be great. So that's the vision for the future. And at this point, I'd like to share some of your questions with our panel. Okay, so the first one is how to shift financial models to have upgradable products rather than design for obsolescence. And the example here is Tesla's making headway, for example, upgrading stopping distance on Model 3 with a software upgrade. Okay, so who would like to share something about shifting the financial model for upgradable products?
Let me just offer one comment to start. I think the IoT trend that I mentioned and was alluded to by Judy is going to facilitate some of that. So when there's connectivity with a lot of devices, you'll potentially be able to push out upgrades and so on. Now, I think we all have to keep in mind there's a downside to this, and it's been in the news lately, right? The privacy concerns, the security concerns, and so on will come along with that connectivity, and that's what we're all going to have to be very careful about. I was just sitting here thinking that we'll be turning our homes into something like the HAL computer from 2001: A Space Odyssey, where I'll be trapped in there, it'll close the door on me, and won't be able to get out, and so on. But suffice to say that it will facilitate upgrades wirelessly, no doubt about that.
So I agree with Bruce that security and privacy are going to be huge challenges to tackle. In our experience, looking at services business models drives a lot of new thinking because it changes the business's incentives. When you sell a product, a lot of times the first things customers look at is cost. If they're really sophisticated customers, they might look at total cost of ownership that includes their operating cost. When you sell a service, suddenly that operating cost is embedded in the cost that customers see. And so that provides a much easier way to look at the total cost that makes different choices possible. Like in the example of selling a bigger and more expensive cartridge, you would do that at retail successfully, but you couldn't do it very profitably in a services business model. So I think that's a really important area to look at.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Tom?
And I think for Oracle, that's the transition we're going through right now. 5 years ago, it was, we sell you the hardware, we sell you software licenses, you manage your own data center. That's the whole, just behind the cloud. So, to me, Oracle may not have the reputation for it, but they do try to offer choices to the customer. So we will own the hardware, you can run it in your data center, or you can give us your data, we'll run it in our data center. You don't have to worry about the upgrades. If we're going to faster processors, if it's going to higher capacity storage, we'll manage all those hardware upgrades ourselves, and it's off the back of the customer. They're not having to invest in the hardware or worry about the end-of-life processing of the equipment. Oracle will do that for them. And like I said, it was, that becomes a service, and it's, the cost is all rolled together. So I think that's a good model. At least it's one that Oracle's behind as well as others.
Great, excellent. The next question I'd like for Lou to start to respond to, please. So this questioner says, the concern over sham recycling can trip up legitimate recycling efforts. So how big of a headache are restrictive hazardous waste regulations to an aggressive recycling program?
So that's a good question. Unfortunately, the recycling industry has received somewhat of a bad name. If you look back to a lot of the current voluntary regulations that are in place right now, things like R2 and e-steward requirements, those didn't really start because companies wanted to do good for the economy. They started because a lot of these companies were shipping stuff overseas. A lot of the stuff that was going overseas was being very improperly processed, to the point that you had places like, I think it's Gawang, China, places in India where they're literally processing this stuff with torches and hazardous fumes and all sorts of stuff. So a lot of these companies receive a lot of bad publicity. That caused them to come together to form organizations like eSteward and R2 and all of that. So now I think a lot of companies, because of the upper performance requirements, a lot of companies are being much more responsive in how they go about their recycling and what they do. In our case, we tend to work with R2 recyclers or eSteward recyclers on our stuff. We also do a lot of hazard materials, so we'll work with specialized refiners who specialize in that. So you really have to be cautious about how you choose. The other thing is, the data piece of it is a huge issue, because a lot of companies, to wipe a hard drive, if you wipe it and reuse it, it can take anywhere from an hour to a few hours. So it's a very lengthy process, and a lot of companies don't want to do that. So you really need to pick the right type of company that you partner with.
Thank you. I have a question for anyone who would like to respond. I'm really excited about 3D printing, about additive printing. And, I would really love to hear perspectives from the panel on to what degree do you think that 3D printing can help enable the circular economy? And if there's any way that it could possibly deter us from achieving circular economy?
Chime in
Judy?
with that.
Okay.
We talked earlier about the competition between repair and buying new.
Yeah.
And how if repair is too expensive, people don't do it. I have a favorite story that I think illustrates why additive manufacturing, the ability to make unique parts, could be really valuable in enhancing repair. So how many of you have thought about buying an expensive new appliance because some small plastic part, like a knob on the one you have, is broken? I'm glad to see I'm not the only one. So for me, it was my dishwasher, and the handle broke. And I looked on Amazon to see if I could buy a new part, and I could, in black for my white dishwasher, and for about $40. I talked to my friends who do know about injection molding, and they figured it was probably a 20-cent part. So why does it cost $40? Well, that part was probably made years ago, and it's been sitting around for years. A bunch were made at end of life when they stopped manufacturing that model. And they've been sitting around for years in case somebody bought them. Many of them will probably never get purchased. And those that are, you got to pay for all of that in the service of somebody holding onto it and sending it to you. So it's probably a fair price. Fortunately, my dishwasher worked anyway, and so I just didn't do it. But if my dishwasher hadn't worked, since it was like 10 years old and starting to not clean dishes so well, I probably would have said, it's enough. I'm just going to buy a new one. So I think 3D printing offers that opportunity to match supply and demand and be able to keep a digital part instead of a physical part and deliver it much less expensively from the equivalent of your local coffee
And in
shop.
the right color.
That's a great example.
Just one other thing for everybody's benefit. I think Judy very consciously gave an example in the repair space because there's tremendous potential there to enhance circularity using 3D or additive printing. But if you're talking about the original manufacturing process, it has its limitations, the principal one being speed. So when you start to get into the volume manufacturing of certain types of either devices or other sorts of goods, it's got some definite limitations. So for instance, in the footwear business, some companies are now starting to use 3D printing for sort of customized ordering of shoes. And by the way, it's not the entire shoe, it's a portion of the shoe is made on the 3D printer, and it's married to the upper, shipped to you, and so on. Now, think about that as you start to scale up. You could do thousands of those. If you had enough equipment, potentially you could do more than that. Last year, Nike sold 450 million pairs of shoes. going to need an awful lot of 3D printers and an awful lot of time to make that many shoes. So this comes all the way back to this whole notion of, how is our society made up? Our consumption of goods is also something that's going to have to be addressed somewhere along the line, so that the demand isn't driving the necessity for those sorts of manufacturing methods.
Thanks, Bruce. At this point, I would just really like to thank the panel. Thank you. And thank you to Mike for inviting us to cover circular economy, and I wish you well with it. Thanks for coming.
Thanks also to Pamela.